Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. On my channel and in my other various media, here, there, and yon, print and digital, I try to share good information without an agenda and without mysticism attached about Old Norse and other historical languages, about runes, about Norse mythology, and other things preserved in Norse literature. Today, I thought that I would make a quick video about Mimir, the beheaded wise man of Norse myth, who is a major advisor of Odin, apparently, although he is not mentioned in many places, and just sort of sum up what we know about this figure in one place for those looking for information about him. All right, well, I'm always interested in names, and it is curious to note that the name of this figure occurs in probably three forms. So generally, you will see it cited as Mimir. And by the way, in popular media, like I believe in the God of War games, his name is pronounced by people with an emphasis on that second syllable, Mimir. That's a perhaps unfortunate tendency of English language speakers to assume that foreign languages tend to be accented later in the word than English words typically are. But in fact, all Old Norse words, or indeed modern Icelandic words, are emphasized on the first syllable. So it's Mimir, not Mimir. Mimir is how you'll usually see it cited, and that is how Snorri Sturluson, in his Prose Edda and his less well-known work Ynglinga Saga, names this being. But it is worth noting that his name is Mimir, without that second I, as he is referenced in, for example, Völuspá and the Poetic Edda, as well as Sigurdrímur in the Poetic Edda, a little bit more of a deep-cut reference to him, and also by the skald and saga hero Egil Skallagrímsson, who in a poem, Sonatorek, I Mourn My Sons, calls Odin Míps Vinir, so friend of Mimir, that form of the name. That possessive form, Míps, by the way, is what we see in all of those, is Míps Hovud, Mimir's head, Míps Vinir, Mimir's friend. We don't see that nominative form, Mimir. That's what you would actually find in the dictionary or glossary, but that's what it has to be based on that possessive genitive form. And then likewise, there is a genitive form of his name apparently in Mímameðr, in the very little known Fjolsvinnsmál poem in Eddic style. There, Mímameðr, the tree of Mimi, is a name for what has to be Yggdrasil, the tree that has roots in different realms of the Norse cosmos. So that looks like it points, again, looks like a genitive form of his name, Mima, pointing to yet another form of his name, Mimi. So three potential names there for him, Mimir, Mimir, Mimi. I'll typically say, and just about everyone will always typically say Mimir, just because that's what is used in the Prose Edda. Worth noting, this is an example of the same root as we see in, for example, Latin memoria, or in Old English mimor, yemimor, meaning remembering, mindful. So it was named from an old word for memory that, however, I should point out is not the typical word for memory in Old Norse, where muna is the typical verb for to remember. You might note the name of the raven Munin, right? Hugin and Munin, the thought and the memory, or potentially, the two mental processes, more simply than that. All right, so what do we read about Mimir or Mimir? The Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, which are two different books, right? I've got a video about that you should look at if you're unclear about the difference. Talk about him a little bit differently. So in Völuspá, the poem of creation in Ragnarok, and the Poetic Edda, we read about him in two different stanzas. So in stanza 28, reading from the Konungsbok, or Codex Regius version of that poem, in reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation, not modern Icelandic pronunciation. Alt veit ek Óðinn, hvar þú auga falt í innumera Mímisbruni. So this is the Volva, the narrator of that poem, the witch or seeress talking to Odin. She says, I know everything, Odin. I know where you hid your eye in the famous well of Mimir. So Mímisbrunner, the well of Mimir, Mimir's well. Notice actually here it is spelled Mimis as opposed to Memes in stanza 45 of the same poem. Is the well where Mimir's head apparently dwells. And this well is at the root of the tree Yggdrasil, again the tree that has roots in different realms of the Norse cosmos. Now, what more information do we get about this in the Prose Edda, where Snorri Sturluson takes poems such as Völuspá and clarifies them in some instances for us, or perhaps confuses them for us in some instances. But here I think we can credit him for clarifying. He says there, Þrjár rötur tresins halda því upp og standa afar breytt. Ein með Åsum en önnur með Hrímþórsum, þar sem forðum var Ynglinga gap. Inn þriðja stendur yfir Niflheimi og undir þeirri rót Hvergelmir en Nýðhogur gnagar neðan rótina. En undir þeirri rót til Hrímþórsa horfir, þar Mímisbrunnur, spekð og mannhut í fólgið, og hittir svo Mímir á brunninn. Hann fullur af vísindum fyrir því að hann drekkur úr brunninum af horninu Gjallarhorni. Þar kom Alfóður og beidisk eins drykkjar af brunninum, en hann fekk eigi fyrr en hann lagði auga sitt að veði. So, three roots of the tree, stuck in Yggdrasil, hold it up and stand very wide, very broadly. One is among the Aesir, the gods, and another with Hrímþórsum, ice monsters, ice giants, enemies of the gods at any rate, where Ginnungagap was before. Ginnungagap was the primal chaos before the realms were created. The third stands over Niflheimr. This is the underworld, identical with, or part of, or embracing Hell, the realm of the dead. And under that root is Hvergelmir. This is a well from which some of the primordial rivers flowed. And Nýðhogur, the serpent, gnaws the root from beneath. And under that root, which looks toward the enemies of the gods, the Hrímþórsar, there is Mimir's well, in which wisdom and wisdom, pretty much two words for the same thing, Old Norse literature, much like, this is my impression, the Hebrew of the Old Testament, or the work of a poet of similar cadence, like Robinson Jeffers, often will just use two words of the same thing. So wisdom and wisdom are hidden in, and the one who owns the well is named Mimir. He is full of wisdom because he drinks out of the well from the horn Gjallarhorn. Curiously, the name of the horn that Heimdallr is supposed to blow on to announce Ragnarok, which is referenced in a stanza of Völuspá, which I'm going to come back to momentarily, that also mentions Mimir. There, Allfather, or I think potentially All-Orderer, at any rate a name for Odin. Odin comes there and he asks for a drink from the well, but he did not get it before he laid his eye down as a pledge. He had to give his eye in exchange for a drink from this well. And then Snorri says, as it says in Völuspá, and that's where he quotes, I know Odin where you hid your eye in the well of Mimir. The Volva goes on to say, Drekkur mjóð Mimir morgun hverjan af veði Valfóðurs, vituð en eða what. Mimir drinks mead every morning from the pledge of Valfóður, the orderer of slaughter, another name for Odin. Do you know yet or what? So Mimir is a head living in a well under a root of Yggdrasil that goes toward the realm of the enemies of the gods, the anti-gods, the Jotnar, the Thursar. Now, this is all a little bit confusing because Snorri gives quite different information about Mimir in another source, his lesser-known Ynglinga Saga, part of his Heimskringla, the history of the kings of Norway. I'll come right back to discuss that after a quick word from my friends and partners at Grimfrost. Talks to Mimir's head. In stanza 45 in the Koningsbok, Codex Regius version of Völuspá, again in reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation, we read Leika mýmsunir en mjótuður kundisk at inu galla gallarhorni, hot bless heimdallar, horn á lofti, mælir Óðinn við Míms höfuð. Mím's sons play. Now, who are Mím's sons? Who knows? But who plays at Ragnarok? Because this is the lead up to Ragnarok. Well, beings that are the enemies of the gods, right? This is a good time to be a Jotun. It's a bad time to be one of the home team, the Aesir. So it seems to imply that Mimir is one of the Jotnar, the enemies of the gods, as does the fact that, according to Snorri, the root where his well is located. It's the root that goes into Jotunheimar, the realms of the Jotnar. And fate is kindled. That's one way to read this. I mean, we don't have to stop here and parse Völuspá. I've done that in another video. There's other ways to read this. But fate is kindled at the sound of the loud Gjallar horn. Heimdallr blows hard. So again, this is the horn Heimdallr is supposed to blow to announce Ragnarok. Now note, again, in that little bit of the prose that I read about Mimir's well, it's the horn that Mimir drinks from the well out of. So does Heimdallr come and grab the horn, out of the well before he blows on it to announce it? Seems odd, given that he'd have to go to under a root of a tree in Jotunheimar, the realm of his enemies, to get that horn to blow on it for Ragnarok. Or is there some kind of confusion here about the horn? I mean, you would think that Snorri would be a little bit more likely to be confused than the poet of Völuspá. Maybe these are two different horns that have the same name. Maybe they are the same horn. Maybe Snorri's just wrong on this, the name of the horn that Mimir drinks out of. He's been confused because it's mentioned in this stanza. Who knows? The horn is in the air. Odin speaks with Mimir's head. All right. And by the way, Mimir's head is mentioned in another spot in the Poetic Edda in Sigurdrifamal, stanza 15. This is when the Valkyrie Sigurdrifa, or in the prose version of the story in the Saga of the Volsungs, Brynhildr is talking to the hero Sigurdur, giving him some wise advice, telling him about runes. She says in stanza 15, O bjargi stóð með brymis eggjar, hafði sér og hofði hjálm, þá melti Míms höfuð, fróðlegt it fyrsta orð, og sagði sanna stafi. Someone, no subject is stated, stood on a hill with a sword's edges. He had a helmet on his head. Then Mimir's head spoke wisely the first word and said true things. So there's a tradition of Mimir's head, and just his head, talking. How did he come to be just a head? Well, Snorri talks about that in Ynglinga Saga. Here he contradicts part of his account in the Prose Edda, which is not unusual. A lot of the time, Ynglinga Saga contradicts the Prose Edda, which makes people get confused about what Snorri means. Probably Ynglinga Saga is written a little bit earlier. He might have done a little bit less research before then. He's also trying to euhemerize the stories a lot more to make all these characters early human beings rather than discussing them as gods per se. But at any rate, there he says, Með honum sendu Æsir þann Mimir het in vitrasti maður. En Hönir kom í Vanaheim, þó var hann þegar höfðingi gór. Mimir kendi honum ráð all. En Hönir var staddur á þingum eða stefnum, svo að Mimir var eigi nær, och kom I nokkur vandamål fyrir hann þó svaraði hann innu sama, róði aðrir hvað hann. Þó grunaði Vani att Æsir myndi hafa falsat þá Í mannaskiptinu. Þá tóku þeir Mimi og hálsjöku og sendu höfuðið Ásum. Óðinn tók höfuðið og smurði úr þeim ekki máttu fúna og kvað þar yfir galdra og magnaði svo að það mælti við hann og sagði honum marga leynda hluti. So this is after the first war between the Æsir and the Vanir, who of course are discussed as human beings in Ynglinga Saga. So the Æsir sent with him is Hunir, the one who's named Mímir, the wisest man. They're sending these guys as hostages to the Vanir. And when Hunir came into the realm of the Vanir, he was immediately made a chieftain. Mimir taught him all advice, gave him all of his advice. But when Hunir was in place at things, at his councils or meetings, in such a way that Mimir was not near, and some problem came before him, then he always answered the same, "Let others decide," he said. And then the Vanir decided, or suspected, that the Æsir must have deceived them, been false to them in the exchange of hostages, exchange of men. And then they took Mimir and they cut off his head and they sent the head to the Æsir. Odin took the head and smeared it with herbs which would not be able to rot, and he spoke over it poems, and so he empowered it so that it would speak with him, and it told him many hidden things. So here, in contrast to how Snorri talks about him in the Prose Edda, or the way that he comes across in his mentions in Völuspá, it seems that Mimir is one of the Æsir originally and not one of the Jotnar. It is interesting to note that the well is not mentioned here, but the well is probably a very old part of the myth of Mimir, as a wise head associated with a well that the head dwells in is actually a major feature of local folklore and myths in northwestern Europe. It's quite common in Celtic folklore and myth. There's a great article by Anne Ross on the human head in insular pagan Celtic tradition that I know I've mentioned in some video on this channel before. It might be the When Myth is Inconsistent video or something. I don't know, there's more than 900 videos on this channel that nobody wants to watch, and I guess that includes me because I don't like just digging through and listening to my own voice and look at myself for hours. But somewhere out there I've mentioned this before. So it's interesting that it's so inconsistent, but very likely the sort of core myth here is that we have a very wise head who dwells in a well. Odin wants to talk to that head, obviously, because Odin is obsessed with wisdom and he's going to seek out any source of wisdom, including from a head, even if that head is canonically, one way or another, one of his enemies. I suspect that probably in early times there's not a very organized answer to whether Mimir is Jotun or one of the Æsir or what. But we're confusing ourselves a little bit by trying to put him into one of those categories. I suspect it's sort of uncategorizable, and probably based on the occurrence of these wise talking heads in Celtic tradition, they're probably, or very likely, at an early stage, there isn't a story about how he becomes a head. He's just a head, right? And most of these Celtic stories that are sort of parallel to this and probably helped inspire this, or vice versa, they probably kind of cross-fed each other. These are just heads, and there's no story about how the head got to be a head in a well. It's just a head in a well. So very likely Mimir's story started the same way. At any rate, a council figure in Norse mythology, and one worth making a little video about to summarize what we can say about him. And if you enjoy this kind of video, I hope you'll consider supporting the channel on Patreon, as it helps me continue to make a living making videos about Norse language, myth, and runes, and beautiful places for you to hopefully enjoy and be informed by. And if you're interested in Norse language, by the time this is posted, I will have already started this semester of my Old Norse class with a Friday session and a Sunday session. If that goes well, I will hope to offer that a couple times a year, and perhaps even offer a more advanced reading class for people who have finished that class or already have some reading knowledge of Old Norse or Old English. Well, for now, from high up in beautiful Colorado, thank you, Patreon. Thank you, Old Norse students. And thank you to readers of my books. And I'm wishing all of you all the best.